All right, today we're going to do a deep dive into something fascinating. That deep, maybe even evolutionary connection between what we find beautiful and what is actually healthy. We're going to be looking at a study that really challenges some of our most common ideas about attraction. So let's just jump right into the big question, the one that's at the heart of all this. Is it really true that what we find attractive is also what's actually healthy? It's a belief a lot of us hold, but does the science really back it up? Okay, so to really get into this, we have to start with the theory that kicked this whole idea off. For a long, long time, the main idea has been that our sense of who or what is attractive is basically this clever tool that evolution gave us. It's called sexual strategies theory. And the basic idea is pretty simple, but it's super powerful. It suggests that over thousands and thousands of years, our brains got wired to see certain physical traits as beautiful. Why? Because those traits were good signs of health and fertility. So, if that's true, then it stands to reason that the bodies we find the most attractive should line up perfectly with the bodies that are, physiologically the healthiest, right? Well, it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that, especially when you look at how we've been trying to measure health. And a huge part of the problem, with a lot of the older research anyway, was this total reliance on one kind of misleading metric, the body mass index, or BMI. And this is the core issue, right? BMI is it's a blunt instrument. It literally can't tell the difference between a pound of fat and a pound of muscle. And that difference is, well, it's everything when you're talking about real health. And this right here shows you the problem perfectly. You could have a super fit athlete with tons of muscle and very little fat, and then you could have a person who's mostly sedentary with low muscle and high body fat, and boom, they can have the exact same BMI. According to that one number, they're in the same boat. But in reality, their health profiles are worlds apart. So, to get a real answer, to get past the BMI problem, researchers at Macquarie University came up with a much smarter way to test this whole thing. They decided to look directly at the stuff that matters, fat and muscle. And their method was actually pretty clever. First, they took real people and measured their exact fat and muscle content. Then, they used that data to create these realistic digital models. And this is the really cool part. They handed the controls over to a bunch of observers and let them tweak the fat and muscle on these models until they looked most attractive, and then, in a separate test, most healthy. It's a genius way to directly compare our ideals. All right, so let's get to the good stuff, the results. And we'll start with what they found for female bodies. And, spoiler alert, what people thought was the ideal female body, well, it didn't really line up with what's actually healthy. I mean, the study found this huge disconnect. The body people said was most attractive wasn't the same as the body they said was most healthy. And get this, neither of them fell into what doctors would call the healthy range. Just look at this chart. It tells a really striking story. When people were asked to make a body look healthy, they chose an average of about 19% body fat. But when they were asked to make it look attractive, they went even lower, down to about 16%. Now here's the kicker. The medically healthy range for a young woman is way up here, between 21 and 33%. So both of these ideals were way, way below the healthy minimum. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, for female bodies, this cultural thin ideal seems to be pushing our perception of attractiveness to an even more extreme place than our perception of health. And both of those are already in an unhealthy zone. It's like the cultural idea is just overriding our basic evolutionary wiring for what's truly healthy. But now, let's switch gears and look at the male body. Because what the researchers found here was a completely different story. That disconnect we just talked about, it pretty much vanishes. Yeah, for male bodies, it was totally different. What people found attractive and what they thought was healthy were almost exactly the same, and they were both in line with what's actually healthy. And you can see that contrast so clearly on this chart. The preferences for male body fat were right around 15% for health and almost 16% for attractiveness. I mean, those numbers are super close. And look, they both fall right inside that physiologically healthy range of 8 to 21%. There's no conflict at all. So for men, the takeaway is simple. What we see as attractive is what we see as healthy. And both of those perceptions line up with reality. It all supports this cultural ideal of lean muscularity, where having low fat and more muscle is seen as a win for both how you look and how healthy you are. So, what does this all mean when we put it together? Well, the study really shines a light on this major split and how our cultural ideals are interacting with our basic perceptions of health. This table just lays it all out, crystal clear. For the female body, you can see that the goal of attractiveness pulls the ideal away from health, deep into a range that's just not physiologically healthy. But for the male body, it's the opposite. The goals are in sync, and they both line up with what's actually good for you. And that brings us to the core conclusion, really. For women, it seems like these powerful sociocultural ideas, what we call the thin ideal, are actually strong enough to mess with our perceptions, to override those ancient evolutionary signals that tell us what's healthy. But for men, the modern ideal of being lean and muscular just happens to align perfectly with those same health signals. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? Our ideas of beauty aren't set in stone. They're always changing. So as they keep evolving, are they going to move closer to what's actually healthy, or are they going to pull us even further away?